It's been a priority for several years now for the ACT government in improving the condition, extent and connectivity of boxgum grassy woodlands at landscape scales. So this is a real focus of our new nature conservation strategy. This has required us to work extensively across borders. I think it's something that we're growing into, certainly. And it really has required us to work with a cast of thousands, so to speak, particularly in New South Wales. This sanctuary is a woodland restoration experiment. It straddles the northern ACT border, and it's anchored within a larger landscape that we're referring to as the Greater Guru-Yuru landscape. What the ACT government has been trying to do is support a collaborative and community-driven approach which supports a long-term vision in the Greater Guru landscape, which we refer to as a biodiverse, productive landscape. Recognising we're there to improve biodiversity outcomes, but it's also where people earn their livelihoods from.
We work with researchers, community, landholders, governments to deliver the regional NRM plan in South East Queensland. Key principles in that NRM plan and clear targets in that are issues such as connectivity within South East Queensland. One of the regional plan targets is to have no net loss of size of tracts that are 5,000 hectares or more in size. To have 20% or more of tracts with less than 5,000 hectares in size better connected. So the goals of GER really link closely to the goals in our regional NRM plan, and within that, our organisational targets through our strategic investment plan. Within our region, we have probably 70% of the region is under private land ownership. So that creates a considerable challenge in terms of undertaking tasks within our region for conservation connectivity. It's not within public land. There's a lot of engagement costs. As you would know, South East Queensland being one of the most fastest growing areas in Australia, the population growth, infrastructure development associated with that creates some enormous challenges for us. But we have fantastic biodiversity. We have little fellows like this, the eastern bristlebird, which while you might be tripping over them in Jervis Bay, Rob, you don't in Queensland. We think we maybe have 2 birds left. So for us, this is a species on the edge, a species for which we have invested through our own funds coming through from the state government, from the federal government, with partnerships with other members of the Border Rangers Alliance, through the working group, to do actions, work with landholders, work with private and public landholders to try and get conservation outcomes for some of the unique fauna and flora in our region, as well as the broader landscapes that we work in.
So the GER from an NGO's perspective, I suppose for the Queensland Trust for Nature, it adds a depth to our activities, especially with relation to the revolving fund and also our community engagement activities. So I'd like to illustrate this through the Great Southern Cassowary. As you can see, a large flightless bird has evolved over 80 million years ago from other bird species. Their numbers are in decline, unfortunately, due to habitat fragmentation, car strikes, dog attacks. Now they feed on seasonal rainforest fruit, the cassowaries, and they travel from lowlands up the ranges to the high rainforests. They require protected terrestrial corridors for safe movement. Now their habitat is largely represented in North Queensland in that wet tropics World Heritage Area, and within this region is a small coastal hamlet called Mission Beach, a population of 3,000 now that's grown from an agricultural base to largely a residential community base. In this area, our partner Terrain NRM, also a GER partner, identified 4 terrestrial corridors that the cassowaries use to travel between the rainforest to the west and the beach to the east. The most essential of these corridors contains a parcel of land that the locals called Lot 66. Now Lot 66 is only 26 hectares in size, but I must admit it's a very important 26 hectares. So NGOs such as QTFN, NCT in New South Wales and Trust for Nature in Victoria can help deliver the GER with a private land conservation strategy that works together with other GER stakeholders. So for Lot 66, the outcome one's been successful for all parties, even the developer. So with the Great Eastern Ranges philosophy underpinning that of ecosystem connectivity, community engagement to help deliver an enduring outcome, I'm proud to say that we've saved Lot 66 from another piece of fragmented habitat being destroyed for the cassowary, and probably one of our greatest outcomes for the last couple of years.
So today I'd like to tell you just 4 little stories about how I and the GER have been involved in education. So I'm going to talk to you about school bird surveys, about a My River program that Osgreen runs, which Rob mentioned earlier, and about a partnership with Tocal Agricultural College, and about our relationship with the University of Newcastle. So bird surveys. Well, a lot of us are interested in birds, and so with that and with an idea about how do we measure and monitor our impact in this landscape, we decided to start to do some bird surveys with schools and communities. So in the Hunter we've been training up primary school and high school students to go out there and identify birds. The next one is the My River project, so a partnership with Osgreen where we take out primary school and high school students and teach them real-world science. So they actually get out there with a water testing kit, they do a whole lot of environmental qualities of the water, they do a habitat assessment, and they work together to figure out action plans and actually start to implement them and become leaders in the community by doing it. Another example I want to give is a partnership project we've done with the Tocal Agricultural College. They've used that theory, that connectivity conservation theory that we've talked about, they've integrated it into their landscape. They've got 5 different ventures going on there with beef and chickens and dairy and horses, and they've actually used it to integrate it into their curriculum and as a teaching tool. So they're not only doing the planting along the river, they're doing the weed control along the river, but they're also getting the students actually involved in it and having that as a way of teaching this concept that we have of connectivity. So it's fantastic to actually see them implementing that and using that with their students.
Hovels Creek Landcare is located about 300 kilometres directly to the west of Sydney. We're on the very western fringe of what you might call the GER boundary, where we interface with the grassy box woodlands of the Western Plains. Our landcare group is mainly made up of farmers, but our focus has mainly been internal on our own issues, on our own farms, and I must say that 2 years ago we didn't even know the GER initiative existed. We're introduced to this through the K2W program, and I think we've benefited significantly. We've tackled it from a strategic point of view. We've developed a strategic plan for our area, which Minister Hodgkinson launched for us just a few weeks ago, and it's indicated some really interesting stuff for us. 25% of our area, some 400 square kilometres, is remnant vegetation, not on private land. 55% of it is farmland, primarily with 1 tree per hectare. Only about 5% of the area is intensively farmed. Another lesson that came out of our engagement with GER is that we need new mechanisms to engage with a broader range of recreational and residential landholders in our area. We identified just over 1,000 separate landholders in our 400 square kilometre area. 550 of these owned or manage less than 50 hectare, or 40 hectare actually, less than 40 hectare.
One of the things that I'd like to talk about is recently I've worked with Bathurst Aboriginal community on a project called Walu Gamara, and Walu Gamara means awakening the Mount. And you guys might know the Mount as Mount Panorama. The Indigenous community of Bathurst know it as Walu, which they're currently actually trying to get a dual naming process endorsed by the community there. It took the Bathurst community 8 years to have that land handed back, and they didn't actually hand back the Mount, they handed back a parcel of land on the back of the Mount that was 141 acres. So the Aboriginal community have been were determined to actually make changes and rehabilitate and restore. And I don't like to use the word rehabilitate, so what we use within the Aboriginal community is healing country. Because when you talk rehabilitation, you kind of think people with issues with drugs and alcohol. So, so we try and avoid that word altogether. The significance of the mount is that it's a sacred place. On the top of the Mount Panorama, there was a large borer ring, and when the council claimed ownership of the land, they actually built the hut that sits on top of the mount out of the borer ring stones. So now it's really haunted and nobody lives in it, and they've fenced the mount off. But that's a good example of consultation not happening and engagement with the Aboriginal community to actually talk about the significance of places before work's carried out. So it's kind of one of the things I think is really important when forming a partnership and working with Indigenous communities, is ensuring that negotiation or that conversation starts and you listen, learn, and then you know what the significance is.
So CVB Now is an alliance of 12 of these land care networks and conservation management networks. They extend over a fairly broad geographic reach from the Strathbogie Ranges in the east of the state, sort of northeast, and across the Great Divide over to sort of the Ballarat region, and then the westernmost point in the Grampians, and then heading from those Great Dividing Ranges up through the centre of Victoria, sort of halfway through to the Murray River. It's a bit of the boundary is a bit socially determined at the moment, rather than sort of any great environmental kind of analysis of where we should be working. It is bioregional, crosses a couple of bioregions, incorporates 5 CMAs, not in total, two whole CMAs, and then parts of 3 others. And we've found it actually is a social landscape. Bendigo's plonk in the middle, and people from the west can drive to a meeting in Bendigo in about an hour and a half, and the people from the east have about the same distance to travel. So we are able to coordinate meetings where we all meet face to face. Our role, simply put, is to connect and support the land care networks doing the on-ground work. And we're doing that through building regional knowledge bases that can inform their local actions, through fostering knowledge and skills sharing, and through delivering collaborative action and projects. So I'd just like to mention the role that being involved with the Great Eastern Ranges has provided with that project in particular. It's provided an excellent perspective on the larger context that the project's nested in, which has been very useful when we're thinking about the regional priorities and the objectives for this longer term project. And it's also supported Central Victorian BioLink with designing the planning process that brings in principles of connectivity conservation. So the lessons that have been learned in New South Wales, I can pick up the phone and talk to any of the facilitators, talk to Gary Howling, who's done a lot of the planning, and get direct advice and experience, which has been absolutely invaluable.
Now, what GER has meant to the people and the groups that I deal with, it's connection with other corridor initiatives. We started our corridor project before the GER Illawarra to Shoalhaven group came into being, but now we feel we're not alone, because all over the place you mob are there doing the sort of things that we're doing, and that gives us a sense of we belong to a bigger movement. Within our own area, our people have found that they can identify with other landowners carrying out connectivity conservation. And this has been an important part of them finding that they actually do have a shared vision. But I think what it has done is it encourages us to look at partnerships and collaboration beyond just the corridor area. And I think it's affected our thinking in that way, and that has added value. I think it's also helped us to understand that volunteerism is being supported, but realising that volunteerism is an ethic that is threatened in our communities and not always appreciated and understood by the bureaucrats that we deal with. That's a challenge ahead of us. The last picture on the screen is from a reading of the land exercise 10 days ago, and that's the sea part of our escarpment to the sea. And this is one of the examples of our experience locally. A reading to the land exercise is part of our Art and the Environment project. going with a group of people, on this occasion 40 of us, with an ecologist, with an Aboriginal, and with a local identity, who talked about how they read the land we were walking through. And then we reconvened back to a site and wrote and drew and created art, which will be exhibited in 10 days' time in Berry. And the first of the pictures was the reading of the land in one of the rainforest remnants, and this was the group as they heard how the beach and the 7 Mile Beach National Park is read. The only other point I think that we have learned that is worth sharing with you, and that is that we made a conscious decision to only work with the willing. We're not going to spend any time on trying to convince people that are going to play hard at being convinced. What we're finding is that those who weren't willing are becoming willing and asking, can we have it too? And so I guess it's a little bit like an infectious disease. If you do it well, it gets spread. I'll close by just saying that on the poster it says connecting nature, connecting people. Well, I think by connecting nature, in our experience, you connect people. It's all about people.